So when doing the work, what I understood, it's very important that you have a specific situation and you go back into a situation, even like a moment in a situation. Can you kind of give a logical explanation of why is it so important, and why do I need this one specific moment in a situation?
Yeah. So overall, I would say the reason why I stress this so much is that the nervous system is very concrete, and we don't want to just make changes in our intellect. We want to change our responses, and they are anchored deeply in this map of reality, in this learning that is anchored in our in the deep nervous system. So if we have an abstract conversation about how people should behave or how we should act in certain situations, we will easily both agree that yes, we should be, people shouldn't lie, people should always speak the truth. That makes sense, and that just adds knowledge or intellectual satisfaction on top of something, right? Reality is that there are certain situations when you lie. Even though you have all this knowledge, it's just like we all know we shouldn't smoke. People smoke, you shouldn't eat chocolate cake when you're on a diet. People do that anyway. That's because even though they know stuff, there are structures deeper in their psyche or in their nervous system that has coping strategies. For example, if we take smoking or overeating, which is like when I feel this particular kind of feeling, or when that begins coming on, I want to move away from it because I can't handle that experience, because let's say when I was a child I felt it too overwhelmingly, and I still believe that I can't handle that because that was my 3-year-old coding, right? And that still runs. So even though I have this knowledge that I shouldn't eat cake, I eat cake anyway because that's my coping mechanism. So we can have an abstract understanding of that, but it's very different from looking at what actually happens deep inside me when I'm in a situation, when I am getting overwhelmed by this feeling that makes me suddenly reach for the cake or the cigarette or lie or whatever it might be. And the only way to tease that out, to open us up to actually having these changes happen and doing this, creating this awareness of what's going on, is by having specific situations to anchor in. Otherwise it'll just be talk. And then we are actually better off without it. I think, having knowledge on top of behavior that contradicts the behavior just makes us hate ourselves. Compared to get the compassion that can come when I actually understand, oh wow, I'm going for that chocolate cake because this feeling that's coming on now is so overwhelming, I believe is too overwhelming for me. So it's a good, intelligent coping strategy to change my state. I can love that behavior, have compassion for it, and realize, I was 3 years old when I learned this. And it was correct. The 3-year-old couldn't handle it. My nervous system was too immature to handle this kind of anger or whatever it might be that I've been overwhelmed with by an adult. But now I'm 50 and I can actually hold my ground. You can yell at me and I won't die. So I can update this particular coping mechanism into gradually learning to be with the discomfort of your anger towards me. And breathe through it, and and I can do that by acting it out in reality and by looking deep inside and what I call simulate the situation, that is, relive it, activate all the nervous system as if it's real. But we can only simulate when it's concrete. It's the difference between talking about something and speaking from something. Right? When you're in it, you speak from it. You are in touch with the material. When you're talking about it, nothing's going to shift. It's closed in a little box. You're just pointing at it.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So it's like being in that situation, and if it's not specific enough, you're not able to simulate, to go into it, and to actually feel what you were feeling or how you were reacting in that specific situation.
Precisely.
Yeah. And does this situation have to be about people? Most of the example I've seen are like always, an interaction with another person, like a situation that is stressful, and you're, I'm angry with Peter because, right? And that's kind of the sentences we write down. But could it work with something more generic, like someone is not happy with their job? Could they use self-inquiry for that, like if it's not a situation where you're triggered by a person, let's say.
Absolutely. It's basically all the same. It's the world, be that in a person, in a job, in my idea about God. It's all of these things, and then my beliefs about it and my reactions to those beliefs. What is one of the most triggering things for us are other people. So because we are social animals and we feel very interdependent, and our nervous systems are even like resonating with each other. So there's a lot going on around people. So very often much of our suffering has to do with other people. Mm-hmm. And especially in the method of the work, one of the sort of very good tools is this Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet, which is usually used with people. You can use it with other things, but it's like the easy route is to just find a person, fill in a Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet on this person, and then work on your beliefs. And you can, and I would say when you get a little more experience with this process, it comes completely natural to start using it on many other things. But it's good to just, it's just an easier way to learn it, to do it with other people. Yeah. But another example could be the weather. Like it's raining, it shouldn't rain, right? It's just like a person, he shouldn't yell, it shouldn't rain. But it can be groups of people, and it can be, your example was, can it be done on a job? And yeah, it's a stupid job, or I don't want to do it. Often it'll come down to people anyway. But yeah. there could be elements that just run contrary to some beliefs we have about how the world should be, and anything can trigger these things in us, or can activate our triggers. So you can definitely use this, and there are many skillful ways of doing that. And in the beginning, the Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet is really, and I would say all the way through, it's always a good tool. And you can get a little more sophisticated when there's something that's hard to get to by using some other skillful means. But you can. This is about your map of reality, your nervous system's reaction to the world, and the world to some extent even includes parts of ourselves. Yeah. It can be a reaction to our body, to certain behaviors, to certain thought patterns. It's all external to that part which holds these beliefs. So definitely you can use it for anything.
Okay, so it's easier to start with the people, and you mentioned the Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet, which I've used, and I've come to see that it's quite a long process, right? It takes some time to get through it, and it's a meditation, as you say. Do you have to do it in one session? Like, that's another thought I had while I was doing it. Is it most effective to sit down for 1.5, 2 hours to do that whole worksheet in one session, or could I break it down? And if you have to do it in one session, what's kind of the reasoning behind it?
You can break it down and take one piece at a time over a period of time, and I think that can be an interesting and good process to have like a deep dive on one thing. Absolutely. So that would be my overall answer. You can work it any way you like. It does seem to be the case. I can't remember the sort of the science on it right now, and I have read some studies that say that when we get this activation of the nervous system, step into the simulator, start working, there is a window of about 1.5 to 2 hours when some of the plasticity of our nervous system is present, that we also have as children. But there is like a window where there's energy enough, and where the system is open to rearrange some of its structures. And so if you continue way beyond that, and we can also feel it's also a matter of, it takes energy to do this work. So you just run out of energy at some point. And when you do that, you can keep doing it, but your system is not ready to change these structures. So it becomes a little useless. So there is, things can still happen, and there is this window which seems really good on a particular topic, in a particular situation, then take a little break. You can do it again, and that fits about well with how long it takes to go through a Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet, the way it looks. So I would say a session of 1.5 to 2 hours is a good length. And in that time, you are able to go through an entire Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet. Now you can do another structure where you say, okay, I'll spend an hour on the first one-liner, and then I'll spend an hour on the second, and an hour on the third. And I think that also has to do with your, like, it's a matter of taste also. I know definitely that there are people who will be bored with that and lose motivation, who need some newness. And so going back to something you've already worked on feels like opening something that can be like, wow, and you're halfway there, you're standing in the middle of the river, and you know, it's nice to just pass that river and then go to the next thing. That's my own experience. I have done the other things, and especially if it's a complex topic, but then each inquiry feels like its own sub-inquiry with almost its own Judge Your Neighbor worksheet that I'm going through a whole process on that. And then there's a new angle in the next one. So I guess the answer is not so completely clear. My preference is, you know, sit down, do the work on one particular situation, work through it, have them get to the end, have your system have that experience of being able to decompress and land in it afterwards, and sort of let it pass through your system. And I think that is the easiest way to do it. And then, you know, some people has stamina to meditate for 4 hours, you know, then of course you can do more. And yeah. But again, if you're a beginner, I would say that's definitely the easy approach. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And yeah, another thought I had was like, you know, do you get so good at this that then you don't need to actually sit down, you know, to take 1 hour to work through this, you know, like you as an experienced, let's say, self-inquirer, you know, do you experience a situation and are you able to kind of do self-inquiry on the spot or right after? And like, does it actually become this thing where you're able to, you know, drag it out of your toolbox and apply it maybe a bit more closer to the situation, or like even in the situation to notice that, oh, this is happening, you know, let me see what's happening, and not necessarily doing it days later, you know, with the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet.
Right. Yes, I think that is true. That's how it works, or that becomes possible. It's still a shift of modality, like, or internal state. So if we are in a situation where I suddenly feel triggered by something you say, I need to step out of what we're doing to look at, okay, to inquire, like what's actually going on and why am I so upset with you right now? And that can definitely be done on the fly, and it can also be very good to do it with you as, like, involving you in it. So for me, it's like I would say, okay, could we stop for just a second, because something is really going on for me right now. I feel super triggered by what you're saying. Just need to breathe. I wonder why I'm so upset. And then I'll look at it, and then it's like, oh, it's because you mentioned my mom, and the way you talked about her really felt like you weren't respecting her, or whatever it might be. And I got super defensive. I am generally very protective around her, or whatever it might be, you know. And then, so I'll do it. We can say do it on the fly, but it still requires me to step out into an observer or activate another part of my brain than the fully identified, lost in the activity kind of thing. One of the things that I find this is about is also it's a bit like gymnastics, you know, or if you're doing some kind of sport, you get the ability to control, to be very nuanced in your body sensitivity, for example. A good gymnast can sort of take their leg up and then open it up and stretch the feet, or do something really controlled, knowing every single muscle, which I can't do. I'm just like, I can flap the leg out and that's about it, right? So as you do this work and you travel inside a lot, you start getting much more nuanced in your ability to notice what's going on and to move between different spaces and to isolate or focus on certain aspects. So you just get more fluent and sophisticated in how you can operate inside. And so as you get more experience, that also becomes easier to do. You're less clunky. you have much more like smaller things you can move around. So in a conversation, it becomes possible to do it, or even just after, just going to the bathroom and just looking at, why am I feeling this way right now? Just even noticing that you're feeling a certain way takes some skill, and then like stepping out of the trigger and looking at it from the outside takes some skill, and then breaking it down and then seeing what images are actually happening in my mind, like what's the voice in my head. All of these things you become good at over time, just like any other thing that you train. And of course, as you do, you can respond more sophisticated or nuanced to the challenge. I think what you're also asking is an underlying question of, does it become automated or does something change? Do you have to sit down and do that all the time? And I will say, as the mind opens, there are just fewer and fewer things that are triggering. So it's not so much that you're doing it on the fly, it's more like you don't even notice that this was potentially a trigger. So this guy says something about my mom, to stay in that example, and it's like, oh, that's his opinion about my mom, interesting. I wonder how he is with his mom, but there's not like having to defend, right? So as that settles, because you've worked on many other things, it also happens in this situation. Life just becomes less triggering, and you're more able to see it with a clearer eye and just move with it, or set your boundaries if that's required and say, listen, I need to stop this conversation now. It doesn't work for me, or it doesn't feel good, but in a kind way, but firm if required,
Yeah, so I guess the more situations you also work through, as you say, then you've been in that situation before, and your system has changed. What we talked about in the beginning, you've adjusted your belief system or your response, and you don't get triggered because
you've simply worked it. Like so Peter can trigger me on respect, John can trigger me on respect. If I do the work on John and respect, I'm also working on the trigger with John, it's the same trigger as with Peter. So next time Peter does the same thing, because I did the work on John, Peter's remark won't trigger me because it's out of my system. So you simply remove more and more of these triggers until it takes quite a lot to trigger you. I notice in my life, I've started, seeking out interesting, challenging situations simply for the purpose of reaching some edges and discovering more about myself. And it requires more and more, you can say, like that I put myself in more and more challenging situations, because compared to what would be challenging for me 20 years ago or 10 years ago even, now it's just like I can walk straight through that. I need more if I'm going to be triggered and have some stuff to work on. And that's nice. It's an expansion of my world at the same time, and I find my life to be much richer for it.
Sounds amazing. Almost cynical that you want to look for triggers to not get bored. No, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
It makes
there's truth to it.
Perfect sense.
Yeah, and there is truth to it. Yeah.
Nice. So I've done the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. I've gone through it. I've done the turnarounds. I figured out for each turnaround, how it's just as true or truer than my reality, my belief. And then what? What's next?
I want an action. I want to do something.
Now you just leave me here, and
Well, the thing is, it is about awareness. So the process of self-inquiry is enough to change your perspective. So the next time you're in the situation, you will perceive it differently, and because you perceive it differently, you will respond or react differently. So the seeing is enough. And that's what's sometimes difficult for people to accept, because in this coaching culture we live in, we think it has to be hard, and we think we have to do homework, and we think we have to punish and work hard on ourselves to make ourselves right. But as I sometimes say, how many times do you need to put your hand on a hot stove to learn that that's a bad idea? And for how long? And the truth is, you just need to do that for not even a second, and your system will not put the hand on that stove again. Not because you're remembering it or because you're training the movement, just because there's a learning there that will make you avoid putting your hand on a hot stove. And so if you see it deep enough, it cannot be unseen. Once you've learned or know something, you won't suddenly forget it. Your system, as I continue to call it, your nervous system, your mind, we can use any term we want, will retain that knowledge, because that's what it's made for. That's what we're doing from the moment we are even while we are in the womb, once the nervous system starts to connect enough, it starts to learn. It starts to figure out how things hang together, and we do that through our entire life. And this is just, you could say, boosting it a little bit. There's a sense of compressing time, or instead of having to spend a year learning something, by really focusing on it and looking at it actively, you can learn in a week. But once you've learned it, you've learned it. Just like the lessons you learned when you were 13 about how to be with other people, they're still in you. Sometimes, unfortunately, and sometimes fortunately, right? So there is no after, in the sense that you have to now remember to do something. Either your behavior has changed or it's not. And if it's not, you'll run into new difficult situations and there'll be more work for you to do there. And at some point it shifts in you and you see it differently. And so this guy who's yelling at you, where you used to see an angry man screaming in your face and you had like this defensive reaction, because you've looked at it enough, now you see a hurt man, stressed out and fearful. And so instead of awakening defense, it awakens compassion. And you're like, oh, is there anything I can do for you? And sometimes you don't say that, you just, yeah, I really get that that's upsetting, I'll change my behavior, I'm sorry. And there's no need to defend, because you're not perceiving an attack, you're perceiving frustration.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example. And yeah, I guess for beginners it feels a little bit like, you've done all this and then you're left like in the middle of like what, but I guess it makes perfect sense to think about, you've seen it, if you've done it, if you've gone through the situation and you've seen those different realities, or the many ways that, what you perceived wasn't the only way to perceive the situation, that, next time it happens, you'll be aware of it. It's hard to test because you don't have the situation right away, right?
That's right.
It's like you need to trust in that, okay, now this makes sense and I guess I'll see it next time. But there is no like action point, or like, now I've done this and check, and
and how do I go out
and do the next?
How should I now speak, or what should I now do? Yeah. And I would say also it is also a little bit a beginner thing, that simply because you're not so experienced with doing the work, the effect is not as big, so you won't have as remarkable results. When I run my courses, one thing I'm very focused on is trying to get everybody to at some point experience a shift. Because it's when you experience that shift that you get hooked. That's when you get it. Until then, it's a bit intellectual, like, oh, now it's supposed to be changed. Is it changed? But there is actually an experience you can have where it's like, I see this thing differently. I now, when I put myself in the simulator and imagine the situation again, it's completely changed for me. And how it sometimes shows up is you're filled in a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet and you're halfway through, and you begin to be like, who wrote this? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, how could anyone think this way? And that's when you know, okay, you're really perceiving the situation differently. Because this is like, he should do that? No, he shouldn't. Of course he shouldn't. That's my job. And it's just so clear to you. Yeah. And that's when it's shifted. And you can actually feel in the moment of working on it, that because you perceive it so differently, it's very easy to see that next time I'm in the situation, I'm also going to be different. And of course, it's great to then experience it. And what's funny is very often we don't even notice that we are different when we're in the situation, because this is just our new response. It's not like we feel the contrast. We just notice, for me, it's like someone actually has to point it out sometimes, or say to me, wow, you handled that well. And I'm like, oh yeah, 10 years ago I would have been completely messing this up, and now it just flows easily. But if it's not pointed out, or if I don't notice it myself, if there isn't a benchmark to compare to, then that's just my reality. So it doesn't feel special until you remember, oh, where did all my trouble go? Like, where's all my upset? Why am I not being triggered 15 times a day? Yeah. Like, why is life easy?
Why is life easy?
Yeah.
No, that's, And I like the idea. I haven't thought of that, but looking at worksheets that you've completed a while ago, right? And actually keeping them and be like, oh wow, I got so annoyed by this situation, right? Which maybe recently I've encountered, and it was completely different. Yeah, I haven't done that. What I meant was, while you're doing the work, you're halfway through working through the worksheet, and then the rest of it just changes, was what I meant. But I think it's an interesting idea to go back. I find old worksheets to just be done. At some point in the beginning I saved them, but now I throw them away immediately, because
they lose their energy for me once I've worked them. And it could be interesting to revisit some of them and see like, oh, that's what I worked on back then. Or maybe you see, oh, I'm still working on that. Okay, 15 years later, this can still happen for me. But I think that would be the rarer case. And mostly it would be like, wow, I was so upset with that situation. Oh, poor me. That must have been tough. Yeah.
Yeah.